Hello and welcome to today's flight. We're on the ground at Tacoma Narrows Airport, getting ready to take off and fly the ILS runway 17 approach in our MD-500 helicopter. All right, let's take a look at our flight plan. We're going to be flying from Tacoma Narrows Airport to Tacoma Narrows Airport via the missed approach procedure for the ILS 17 approach. And here's what that's going to look like. So we want KTIW, and then we're going to be flying to the Sen intersection and back to KTIW. And let's take a look at the procedures that are available for approach. And there's the ILS 17, and that's going to be from the Sen intersection. We're going to add that to the route. So that's what our flight plan looks like for today. So the missed approach procedure right here calls for climbing to 1,500. This would be on runway heading for runway 17. Then we're going to make a climbing right turn to 2,000, and then heading 290. And then we're going to intercept the Seattle Vortac 227 radial to the Sen intersection. It calls for a hold, but instead of that, we're going to do a procedure turn and then inbound on the ILS 17 approach. So that's what it's going to look like. Let's get that all set up in our helicopter. All right, we're putting in the Sen intersection. Now it's asking us which one. Of course, that's going to be northwest. And then we're going to add KTIW in our GTN 750. And then we're going to go back here to procedure, and we're going to select the approach, which is the ILS 17 transition from Sen. And we're going to go ahead and load that. All right, that's loaded in. We're going to go to map view, and we're going to leave that set to VLOC and bring up our flight plan here. Okay, let's get our radio frequencies tuned in. And tower frequency here is 118.5. And then we have our departure frequency for Seattle is 120.1. That's set in standby, and the ATIS frequency here is 12405, setting that in COM2. 12405 set, and we're going to set up our navigation frequencies. We're going to be using two things. One is going to be the ILS frequency, which is 109.1. So let's go ahead and set that up. 109.1. Looks like that's already set up. In Nav Radio 1, the next thing we're going to do in standby for Nav Radio number 1 is we're going to put the Seattle VOR in there, which is 116.8. So that is set in standby. So now we're going to go to Nav 2, and we have 109.1, and then I'm also going to put the Seattle Vortac 116.8, that radio as well. As you can see, it's rainy, it's overcast. I think the cloud ceilings are around 600 feet. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to be doing above that, so we may be in and out of clouds throughout the flight. Right. All right, now we're going to get our OBS set up, so we're going to take a look again at ForeFlight. All right, so there you see our present position at Tacoma Narrows Airport. So we're going to be flying, again, runway heading. We're going to be following the missed approach procedure, and when we reach 1,500, we're going to make a climbing right turn to 2,000 feet on heading 290. We're going to intercept this 227 radial off the Seattle Vortac. Frequency for that is 116.8. Once we reach the Sen intersection, we're going to make a left turn to heading 347, which is the reciprocal course for the inbound of 167. We're going to fly that for 1 minute, and then we're going to turn left 302 degrees, turn right inbound 122 degrees, intercept the 167 ILS localizer, and by the time we reach the Sen intersection, we'll follow that down to the runway. All right, so that's the plan for today. Okay, now it's time to make the flight happen. Let's go ahead and take off, and we're going to be flying along the taxiway southbound, and then we'll go over runway 17 and fly outbound on runway heading according to the missed approach procedure that we discussed earlier. We're going to follow that until we reach 1,500 feet. And as I mentioned, then we're going to make a right turn to heading 290, and we're going to be climbing to 2,000 feet. And then we're going to intercept the 227 radial off the Seattle VORTAC. And then we're going to follow that inbound to the Send intersection. Upon reaching the Send intersection, we're going to make a left turn on heading 347, which is reciprocal of the inbound ILS course. Then we're going to time that for 2 minutes outbound, then execute a left turn on heading 302 degrees, and then fly that for 1 minute, and then make a right turn inbound on heading 122 until we intercept the localizer. And then, of course, we're going to turn on the localizer and back to the Send intersection. And at that point, we're going to begin descending on glide slope. And here we are at the taxiway, and we're going to be making our left turn out here as soon as we get over the runway. Okay, I went ahead and set VOR number 1 to the Seattle VORTAC frequency, and I set the OBS to 047.
Entered runway 1735.
Which is the reciprocal of the 227 radial, and we'll follow that to the Send intersection. All right, here's the runway, and we're just going to follow this outbound. And again, this is a little unorthodox in the sense that this would normally be a missed approach procedure, and we're flying it from the airport itself. But this is a training mission, and that's how I chose to set it up. So normally you would fly the missed approach procedure if you don't have the runway in sight by reaching your decision height, which in this case is 200 AGL. And then you would follow this procedure. So again, for simplicity's sake and for training, I chose this from the airport. So we're going to be doing this outbound here. We're climbing now to 1,500 feet, and then we'll make our right turn on heading 290. As you can see, there we are on our runway heading, getting ready to make our turn. The dotted line with the arrow is just an approximation of where the aircraft might be when it executes its turn. Again, that's just a graphic aid. And it looks like we're getting a wind from the right. It's kind of pushing us, so I'm steering the helicopter to the right to maintain our runway center line. And we're slightly off center line here and making that correction. The OBS in the lower right side of the panel is our VOR number 2 that is tuned to the ILS frequency. So once that needle on the localizer centers, we'll know we're exactly on runway heading. So there we are climbing, coming up on 1,500 feet here. About 200 feet to go, and then we'll begin our turn to the right, continue climbing to 2,000 feet. And we got 100 feet to go. And there we are. So let's go ahead and start our right turn. Right now we have VFR visibility, but I anticipate we'll be in and out of clouds as we continue this flight on a typical rainy day here in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, rolling out on 290. I'm going to continue this for however long it takes to intercept the 227 radial. And as I mentioned, I have the Seattle VORTAC tuned into VOR number 1. There's 2,000 feet. We're going to level off. So heading 290 and 2,000. We're going to maintain 2,000 throughout the entire procedure. And that's our aircraft position on the moving map for ForeFlight, geosynchronized with the actual approach plate, which is pretty cool. And there's a little outside view of what we have going on outside. It sure is pretty, looking at the early morning sun through the clouds there. All right, everything is looking good. We have a little while before we reach that radial and intercept the 227. So there's the radial right there depicted on the moving map. And that's an approximation, but we should be pretty close to that course line when we actually intercept the course. And there in the lower portion of the console, you can can see the GTN 750 displaying the same thing that we're seeing on the for-flight moving map that's geosynchronized over the plate. Another view outside the helicopter. Again, it's a pretty morning. It's not a great day for flying, but it certainly is a great day for the visuals. Okay, we should start to see the Omni bearing selector start to move on VOR number 1 as we get close to that radial. And as it starts to move, as you can see, it's a pretty sharp turn, greater than 90 degrees. Go ahead and try to execute that turn a little bit early so we don't overshoot our radial. All right, looks like it's about time we should make that turn. And hopefully we'll have the OBS centered by the time we roll out. Just about there. Be rolling out here in a few seconds. And we'll make any kind of course corrections as we get closer to the send intersection. All right, that looks good there. We're going to hold this heading inbound before we execute our procedure turn. As you can see on the moving map, there is a hold, which if you do the missed approach, you would typically enter into the hold, but instead we're just going to use the procedure turn outbound and simulate that we have air traffic control clearance to make the ILS 17 approach after our missed. All right, so right now I'm going to go ahead and activate the approach in our GTN 750, so that's now active. All right, so we're looking at the lower right there, the VOR number 2. We're going to watch that needle as it comes close to center. We're also going to listen for the outer marker beacon. So we have a couple of indications of when we're intercepting our localizer course. There you can see the localizer starting to come in on VOR number 2, and here in a few seconds we should be hearing the outer marker beacon. All right. Turn left here. We'll make sure that we keep that localizer centered. I'm going to go ahead and change my VOR number 1 frequency over to the ILS frequency of 109.1. I'm also going to go ahead and, so there I'm setting right now my stopwatch. I'm going to time that outbound for 2 minutes before I make my left turn to 302. All right, everything's looking good. Holding altitude steady at 2,000. Slight course corrections here to stay on that localizer outbound. There you can see the glide slope in the lower right display, showing us that we're below the glide slope, but that's fine. We're going to stay at 2,000, and that will center by the time we come back in and reach the send intersection. And just a few more seconds to go. There it is, an outbound turn. I'm going to go ahead and time this for 1 minute. All right, everything's looking good so far. Looks like we probably have zero visibility outside the helicopter. Right now I'm just fixed on the panel and flying solely by instrument. All right, keep an eye on that clock before we make our inbound turn. I got the stopwatch started a little bit late. It's probably a little more than a minute outbound, but that's not an issue as long as we stay inside that protected airspace of the procedure, which we're well inside of that. All right, there's a minute. Standard rate turn to the right. coming up on 122 degrees. And we'll keep an eye on the OBS, and as that starts to center, we'll make our turn. So right now, both VORs are tuned to the ILS frequency of 109.1. I like VOR number 2 better for glide slope, so that's primarily what I'm going to be looking at as we make our descent from the center intersection down to the runway. All right, there it is. We're on localizer. Fly that now inbound. And a couple things are going to happen when we reach send. Number one is the glide slope will be centered down there on VOR number 1. And then we'll have to follow that down to our decision height, which on this approach is 494 feet MSL, which is 200 feet above the runway. Looks like we're having, that wind is still trying to push us to the left, so I'm probably going to have to steer a little bit to the right here to maintain our center line. There you can see both OBSs are calling for a slight right correction to compensate for that wind. All right, here in under a minute, we'll be at the intersection. We'll be listening for the outer marker beacon, and we'll be watching that glide slope indicator, VOR number 2. And then we have glide slope coming in. A few seconds here, we'll begin our descent. And probably about 500 feet per minute should do it, but I'll make any necessary adjustments to keep that glide slope centered. Still having it correct for that wind. Right. Glide slope's almost in. And we're going to begin our descent. I'll start out with 500 feet per minute and see how that does for us. Still having it correct for that wind a little bit to the right. And all the way down to the runway. All right, looks like for now 500 feet per minute is doing it. And again, we're looking for 494 feet decision height, and see if we have the number in sight by then. All right, everything's looking nice and stable. I'm going to reduce my sink rate just a little bit here so that glide slope doesn't get away from us. And still correcting to the right. Same for the wind coming from the right.
3 mile final runway 17.
Slightly below glide slope, so I'll start making some corrections here. And coming up on 1,000 feet. Still below glide slope, still slightly left of course. $1,100. I'm just reducing my sink rate here to catch that glide slope. And once I recapture, I'll continue descending at about 500 feet. All right, glide slope's coming back in. There's 1,000 feet. 500 to go. Okay, resuming our descent. And steering a little bit right here again. We're getting a little bit left of course because of that wind. Glide slope's back in. I'm gonna hold this.
500.
And up on 800 feet, 300 to go. Reduce my sink rate here a little bit. Right a little bit. See the radio altimeter down in the lower part of the console. which I have set for 200 feet. Okay. That's looking good. 200 feet to go. I don't have the runway in sight. I'm just going to hold what I have here. Increase my sink rate. Well above glide slope. Localizer's looking good. Still don't have the runway. Left. For the runway. We're good on localizer. Glide slope, we're above glide slope. Increase my sink rate. Right, okay, there's the runway. Good. Yeah, it's genuine IFR here today. All right, so now I'm going to overfly the runway, and then I'll exit at the taxiway and land over there by Havco, right where we took off from. All right, so definitely above glide slope on that approach. But right now we're leveled off over the runway at 200 feet, slightly less than 200 feet. Go ahead and exit here at the taxiway. Land the helicopter and debrief. For a minute there, I was afraid we weren't going to see the runway at all. Then we have to do this approach, but things are a little different in a helicopter. You can do things that you can't do in a fixed wing. So, all right. I'm going to turn here at the taxiway and park the helicopter back over near Pavco. All right, we're on the ground. Thanks for joining me today on our flight as we executed the ILS runway 17 approach here at Tacoma Narrows Airport as we get the helicopter shut down. I want to talk a little bit about the Cowan Sim 500E. It is an awesome machine. Cowan Sim is fantastic when it comes to attention to detail, and they have amazing customer support. Always looking for input from users so that they can improve their product. There are a couple of bugs I discovered when flying the ILS approach that I've brought to the attention of Cowan Sim, and I'm sure they'll address those in their next update. One of which is the ability to capture localizer when using the stability augmentation system, and the other is the VOR number 2 accuracy. I discovered that when checking it against VOR number 1 and found that it was out of calibration, but I'm sure that they'll address these in their next update. Thanks for joining me on today's flight, and we'll see you again next time.